Hello, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon or this evening's event, depending where you're watching from. Today we're visiting Jakarta, and we've been on a trip around the world the past few weeks. We've been to Seattle, Quebec, Nanjing, Lviv, and now Jakarta. It's a trip for 5 leaves around the world through visiting other UNESCO Cities of Literature. I'll hand over to Hannah in a second, but I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. If anybody's got any questions for anybody on the panel, if you can just stick them in the Q&A box down at the bottom. And if you want to see any of the other events we've been doing through the series, they'll be on our YouTube, which I'll put a link in the chat to. But yeah, anyway, I'll hand over to Hannah Chivartha, who's the Director of City of Literature and the UNESCO programme in Nottingham. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Simon. Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Hannah Trevarthen, and I am the Director of Nottingham UNESCO City of Literature. It's a real treat to be chairing this conversation and to be kind of traveling the world via the internet to meet our lovely colleagues and writers representing Jakarta City of Literature. For those of you who might not be super familiar with Nottingham UNESCO City of Literature, we received our designation in 2015, and we curate a vibrant programme of projects and events which celebrate the city's literary history and its contemporary scene. Recent events have included Big City Reads, which is a summer reading campaign where we gave over 2,000 books across the city. They were chosen by young people for their mood-boosting power, and you still might spot a few around the city. We're also doing a project called Young Voices Amplified, which is a programme which engages young people in schools across the city to give them confidence through the written and spoken word. And finally, coming up in December will be Slamavision, which is a spoken word Eurovision with just as many sparkles as Eurovision, and it's held between the UNESCO Cities of Literature. Last year's contest was won by the fantastic Nottingham poet Cara Thompson and their poem Island Screams even, and so we are the reigning Slamavision champions, so we're hosting it this year, and you can find out more about that event online through our social media. We, the people behind Nottingham City of Literature, inspire the city to read, write, and build a better future with words. And so we're really kind of delighted to be sharing that message with you today. There's one more stop on this kind of around the world in cities of literature. That is kind of event with Lviv City of Literature, and you can join them later this week, in fact, on the 4th of November, when Stefan Kolashaw meets Oslania Yaramchuk. Apologies for mangling that, my Ukrainian pronunciation needs some improvement, and there'll be information on that posted in the chat. I'm now really delighted to hand you over to Laura Prinsloo, who's going to tell you a little bit more about Jakarta City of Literature, who joined the network last year. Over to you, Laura.
Thank you, Hannah. I was quite fortunate to meet Hannah again after COVID a couple of months ago in Melbourne. And we are very fortunate to be able to be visited virtually by Five Leaves Bookshop in Jakarta, but maybe next time, Hannah or Simon, anyone from Nottingham, if you want to visit Jakarta, please let us know. My name is Laura. I'm the vocal point of Jakarta UNESCO City of Literature. We were appointed last year in November, so we don't have as many programs as Nottingham, like what Hannah just explained, but let me share a little bit about what Jakarta is. It's a historic port city of the region since pre-colonial era. Naturally, Jakarta becomes a melting pot of culture. Due to the growth of scholars in Batavia, colonial name of Jakarta, books became a way for people to exchange ideas, which sparked nationalism and then carried Indonesia to independence. Balai Pustaka was Indonesia's first publishing house, was founded here in Jakarta in 1917, followed by the Indonesian Publishers Association in 1950, and then now Jakarta also houses the Literature Museum of H.B. Yasin that archives a comprehensive collection of Indonesian literature. With its massive infrastructure development, Jakarta hosts a number of international events, ranging from the Indonesia International Book Fair, the Jakarta International Literary Festival that we just had recently, to the upcoming 33rd International Publishers Congress next week. So there's going to be about 600 people all over the world coming to this Congress next week, and we're delighted that there's so many annual publishing events and book fairs around the city. With the most books published per year, Jakarta is the driving force of the Southeast Asian book scene. About 30% of the book publishing industry is located in Jakarta and Greater Jakarta. And we believe that Jakarta, as UNESCO first city of literature in Southeast Asia, means placing literature at the heart of the region. So we are learning a lot from the UK, from Nottingham, and 4 other cities of literature. And hopefully this is the beginning of many programs together. So I am very delighted to introduce one of our vibrant and amazing writer, Ziggy Zezsyazeoviennazabrizkie. So Ziggy was born in 1993 in Bandar Lampung. That's another island in Sumatra. Within her short writing career, she has already written up to 30 books. Her writing resembles and utilizes children's stories whilst depicting underlying political and social tensions. Ziggy won the Jakarta Arts Council novel writing competition for the Tanah Lada in Pepperland 2015, which was later longlisted for the Khatulistiwa Literary Award. She won the same competition in 2016 with Semua Ikan di Langit, All the Fish in the Sky, 2017, for which she was awarded the Badan Bahasa Literary Award by the Indonesian Ministry of Education and Culture. Ziggy mainly writes about children and social criticism, both in forms of literary and popular fiction. Her young adult novel Jakarta Sebelum Pagi, Jakarta Dawning, published in 2016, received the Editor's Choice Award from Rolling Stones Indonesia. In 2018, Ziggy joined Ruang Perempuan dan Tulisan, Women and Writing, a project that aimed to rediscover forgotten Indonesian female writers. Heavily influenced by this research, her latest manuscript was described as a feminist narration on unspoken Indonesian history and received an honorable mention from the Jakarta Arts Council. So we'll be hearing more from Ziggy. I think I can't wait to hear the conversation between Ziggy and Nicola. Thank you so much, Hannah, and everyone else.
So thank you, Laura. I think we're going to ask Ziggy to do a short reading for you all so you can get a flavour of their work. So I'm going to hand over to you, Ziggy, to do your reading.
Thank you. Laura, you only got 90 for reading my name. A little bit mispronunciation, but that's fine. I'm going to read from the book that I wrote. Largely, actually, I wrote it in the UK, but also in Jakarta. So I feel like this is a really good place to start this conversation. It's called Kita Pergi Hari Ini, which kind of translates to Today We Go. So I'm going to start reading from the first chapter. Nothing strikes fear in a man's heart quite like children does. It's the screaming, of course. Then there's the crying, and there's speed of running, and the nasty tricking, and the wickedness, and the greediness. There are avaricious thieves, malicious deceivers, merciless midnight wakers. 2 kids are enough to make you bleed out of your ass. This is how government attempts to reduce overpopulation should have gone. They fairly brought us a world that is filled with children. And a lot of children means a lot of noises. Screams, cries, yelps, yells, banters, bubbles, cackles, chitters, chatters, groans, growls, all in all ear-splitting annoyances. The noises grow more and more unbearable by day, that at last everyone here forgets the name of their settlement and begins to call their home the boisterous borough. In boisterous borough, the children outnumber the grown-ups. Many of them are still so very little and they require constant care from a father, a mother, or other people that can be trusted to keep children from accidental or non-accidental deaths and or other accidents. But of course, fathers and mothers must look for money because at the time of this story, boisterous borough no longer recognizes banana peels as an acceptable currency. In another time, money was readily available under the sea, or you could find them buried under the ground, and many grew on trees. Alas, at the time when boisterous borough had forgotten its name, pirates had taken all the money from under the sea, plunderers had unearthed all the money that was buried under the ground, and evil lumber industries had shaved off all the money that once grew on trees. Therefore, the only way to get some money is to work hard enough and hope that the pirates, the plunderers, or the evil lumber industries will find it in their hearts to pity you and give you the money that they pirated, plundered, or evilly industrialized. This is not an easy task, and it takes time. So now you know how difficult it is to find money and why mothers and fathers often have to leave their children at home. They can't take children to work. Everyone knows that pirates bite children on the nose, plunderers always steal too much earwax from children's ears, and evil lumber industries have so often mixed their snot into children's drinking water. Isn't this a sticky wicket? What to do if mothers and fathers must go to find money in a place where children can't go without suffering from a nose bite, an earwax theft, or a snotty pineapple juice? Grandmas and aunts, of course you can ask for the help, but don't they also have money to find, a scream-free life to enjoy? Mothers and fathers who have the time might stay at home. Mothers and fathers who do not have the time but have the money might call a nanny. It will be easy if all mothers and fathers in the world can have a nanny, but not all of them have enough money to have one. Not everyone is that lucky. And for those who are not that lucky, they must find another way. And another way is what Mr. and Mrs. Mo look for. Many people live in boisterous borough. One of them would be the willowy and slightly ugly Mr. and Mrs. Mo in Red House number 17. They're a tiny-sized couple of a husband and a wife who are so thin that sometimes they get blown away by the wind. Like all grown-ups in the boisterous borough, Mr. and Mrs. Mo have children. Unfortunately, they are not that lucky. On the 93rd day since the birth of the third child, Mr. and Mrs. Mo decided that they must find another way. So one windy day, Mr. Mo walks out of the house to find another way. He comes to the Pelican Post, but the Pelican Post tells him that another way comes only on rainy days. And the sugar glider adds, another way comes only to good-looking people, or rich people, or ass lickers. Because Mr. Mo is not good-looking, nor rich, nor is he an ass licker, he's quite convinced that he would never find another way. But luckily, Mr. Mo is married to Mrs. Mo. She is also not good-looking, nor rich, nor is she an ass licker. But on the day that a woman is bestowed a burden to care for another's life, she receives also the skill of discovery, which allows her to discover anything, from a matching neckerchief to a needle in a haystack to half a pair of socks. So Mr. Mo comes to Mrs. Mo with this problem. I asked Pelican Post, but he said another way comes only on rainy days. And Sugar Glider was convinced that another way comes only to people who are good-looking, or are rich, or are ass lickers. Mr. Mo worriedly postulates, but this is not a rainy season, and we are not good-looking, nor are we rich, nor are we ass lickers. That I know. What I do not know is how to find another way when it is not a rainy season as a couple who are not good-looking, rich, nor ass lickers. So Mrs. Mo ponders, and she ponders for a very long time. Women need a long time to ponder because they store in their heads hundreds and thousands of cabinets with a lot of drawers, and it takes a while to sort them all out. The contents of these drawers are cuts of important information. Mrs. Mo eventually discovers the important information she needs in cabinet 1729, drawer 26. Nearly nobody knows this nowadays, but cats make amazing nannies, and they do not smell of sweat. Not ordinary cats, of course. There's a place in this world that houses out of ordinary cats, or cats. Cats who meow not and bake on biscuits, yes. Cats whose existence are reserved only to be known by women who use their heads, like Mrs. Mo and Mrs. Mo's mom and Mrs. Mo's mom's mom. So Mrs. Mo summons Pelican Post, places an anchovy in his beak as a payment, and drops a button into the official mailbag of the Pelican Post Express expedition overnight only. She watches as Pelican Post flies off the window, and she prays for another way to find its way soon, now that they have run out of cooking oil and water spinach. The following morning faces Mr. Mo's incredibly sad face. Mrs. Mo has to go find money today. So does he. They have asked their oldest, Me, to look after his siblings, Ma and Mo. But because Me is only 4 years old, he replies his father with a book, then he sprints towards his toy box. With worries and dreads, Mr. and Mrs. Mo set to find money. But when Mr. Mo opens the door, they both stop in their tracks and smile. But what's standing in front of them is the one they've been looking for. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ziggy. What a wonderful reading.
Thank you.
I love the thing about cats. I recently saw a stage production of My Neighbor Totoro, and it brought to mind the kind of the role of like the cat bus and taking care of children. So thank you so much for that. I am going to now introduce Nicola to read. So for those of you who are not familiar with Nicola Monaghan was born in Nottingham and grew up on council estates there. She studied mathematics at university and then went on to work as a teacher and then in finance. In 2002, she moved back to Nottingham to study creative writing at Nottingham Trent University. Her first book, The Killing Jar, won several awards, and she has published novels and novellas since then. And most recently, her most recent book is Dead Flowers, which I think you're going to read from. Nicola was the first fellow of the National Academy of Writing and has taught creative writing at the University of Nottingham and De Montfort University in Leicester. Over to you, Nicola, and your reading.
Thank you. Yes, I'm going to read from this book, which is Dead Flowers. So I'm going to read two little bits from this. The first one is from almost right at the beginning, and all you really need to know about this bit is that Harry, the main character, he's in the pub on Saturday night. And I guess another thing you should know is that I cannot do a Scottish accent, so I apologise for that in advance. So, A Whiter Shade of Pale, the Loggerheads Pub, Nottingham. Gladys glanced up at Harry through her lashes, looking weirdly coquettish. She handed him the deck to shuffle. Then she took the cards back and dealt them onto the table in a cross formation. Harry had seen this before. His Granny Mac used to do the tarot. She swore by them and would deal the cards whenever she had a decision to make. The old woman turned the cards face up, one then another, announcing them as she went. Bobby strolled across and watched over Harry's shoulder. The King of Swords, Gladys said. Oh, my good night. She turned more cards. Now, don't be startled, young man. This one's death, but don't take it all literal. She looked up and her eyes met Harry's. The Trent will run red with the blood of trees before you see your end, she told him. Harry and Bobby exchanged a doubtful look. Then Harry lifted a hand to his forehead, play-acting a dramatic shiver and making the old ladies laugh. Gladys continued to slowly turn cards over and announce their names. The Three of Swords, turn. The Wheel of Fortune, turn. The Lovers. This card had a picture of a half-naked couple on it, wrapped up in each other and tangled with ivy. Oh, said Bobby, elbowing Harry with a smirk on his face. There's a big future for you here, Gladys said, looking at Harry with a very level gaze. She glanced down at the table with a frown. You'll have fame, be in all the papers. They'll talk about you long after you've passed on from this world. Harry let out a comic gasp, then clasped his hand over his mouth. More than that, she said, you'll be king of your world. Gladys smiled in a far-off way. The tallest woman spoke, her voice rich and deep. King of it all, she said, her words like an echo. She pointed at her card. Wheel of Fortune, she said, and the King of Swords. She smiled and tapped the side of her nose as if there was an in-joke that Harry should know about. Gladys turned her head to take in the whole cross again. She pushed at one or two of the cards, adjusting their positions ever so slightly against the scratches in the wood. Bobby pointed at the lover's card. What's this one about? He said, winking at Harry. I see a beautiful young woman. Oh, yeah, one heck of a looker she is, this gal, the third old bird piped up. I see you nearly half a century after the day you both get wed, wrapped up in each other's arms. What about me? Bobby nudged Harry again. He was enjoying this a bit too much. You'll do all right, Gladys said. You'll be happy in the end. Fame and fortune sounds better, being honest. Gladys smiled like she knew all his secrets, rocking gently in her chair, dancing to her own tune. I see something good here for your children, she said, and left it at that. What about my weans? Harry said. How many? Will they be happy and rich? He was grinning and catching Bobby's high mood. Gladys grabbed up the cards and cleared them quickly. The tarot don't tell you everything, she said. The women turned towards each other then and back to their glasses of gin and orange. Whatever they had wanted from Harry, it was over now. What the hell were they about? Said Bobby as they walked back to the bar. Blood of trees? Harry shrugged. He wasn't smiling anymore. The way she'd suddenly packed up the cards when he'd asked that question about children had put the willies off him. They stood at the bar and he ordered 2 more pints of mild. He thought about the cards. The pints were handed over and he took a big gulp. Bobby stood beside him, staring into space as he took his first sup. Penny for him, Bobby said. Harry took another gulp of his drink and shrugged. Nah, I can't believe in any of that shite anyways, he said. But he closed his eyes and all he could see was a picture from the cards. 3 swords piercing a heart and blood, gurgling and bubbling and thickening like it was boiling in a pot, leaking all over the sticky floor of the pub and pooling at his feet. So that's an extract from the opening chapter. This story goes between the past and the present. And so the next extract I'm going to read you is from one of the modern day sections. And this is the main character, Sian. And she's going to come to the same pub. It's not a pub anymore. She's come from a pub that used to be a church. She's going to a pub that isn't a pub anymore, that she's inherited from her uncle. And weirdly enough, the other one was October 1967. This is October 2017. So if you want to do the maths, that's 50 years later, which might have been referred to in the other passage. So I'll just get on with reading this bit. Sian came down the steep steps past the contemporary art gallery, her eyes tracing the Nottingham lace patterns in its concrete walls. She could feel the history around her. Narrow marsh as it used to be, full of crime and squalor. She felt separated from the slums and violence by the finest of membranes, like if she pushed hard enough she could burst through and find herself years back in time. The sign from the old Loggerheads pub was rattling in the wind, making a crashing noise against its frame. Sian checked up and down the street for any signs of trouble, but could see nothing except leaves being blown and buffeted against the pavement. She could hear Elvis barking and howling the other side of the door. He wasn't usually that bothered when she went out for a couple of hours, but the combination of the high winds and being somewhere new were probably to blame. She dug into her bag to get her keys and his barking got more urgent. It's just me, you silly sod, she said. She opened the door and he came bounding over, doing the dance of love he did whenever she came home, nuzzling her, then rocking from back to front paws. She leaned down to give the German Shepherd a proper scratch behind his ears and let him lick her nose, then locked and bolted the front door, shutting out narrow marsh in the dark. Elvis ran through the hallway to the back door. Sian grabbed the key from a hook on the wall. He was trying to force the door open before she could unlock it. Finally, he burst outside and jumped into the air, barking at the night sky. The house felt damp and chilly, so Sian went into the kitchen and turned the heating on. She wasn't sleepy enough for bed. She rooted through the boxes, searching for something to drink and glasses. She could only find an old bottle of amaretto and the plastic beakers from the bathroom. She poured herself a drink and slipped through to the living room, collapsing on the sofa and kicking off her shoes. Sitting back, Sian tried to relax. She took a sip from her drink. It had a thickness and a rich, high taste. She couldn't shake the idea that part of the slick flavour was old toothpaste. She heard Elvis scratching at the cellar door again. She ignored him for as long as she could. Then he popped his head into the room and stared at her. Fine, she said, putting down her drink and walking back through to the hall. She closed and locked the back door. I can see I'm not going to get any peace here. Let's go and find out what's down there. Sian moved her toolbox and opened the cellar door, flicking on the light switch. There was a bright flash below and then darkness as the bulb blew. How's that for a sign, she muttered with a nervous laugh. She tilted the door back and reached into her toolbox, finding a torch. Then she picked up the box in case she needed tools once she got down there. Elvis scratched at the door again and then looked up at her expectantly. You know, boy, the rule is never go down into the cellar. She smiled at her own joke. And then she pushed open the door and he barged past her and rushed down the stairs barking. Sian followed him, shining the torch ahead of her. She tripped slightly as she misjudged the last step, then righted herself. At the bottom of the stairs, there was a high, sweet smell, reminiscent of old bins. She put the toolbox down on the floor. Elvis was scratching at the far wall and turned towards her, barking. He started to whimper and then pace the floor in a way she'd never seen him do before. Sian felt the temperature of the room drop. She knew this was the effect of adrenaline on her body, but the feeling struck home nonetheless, because Elvis wasn't any old retired police dog. He was a cadaver dog. Elvis had been trained to find the dead. There we go.
Thank you so much, Nicola. It always strikes me that the beginning of the book is reminiscent of Macbeth and the meeting of the three witches, and there's some foreboding that comes out if you read the book.
Yeah, that was deliberate.
So for the audience watching, Ziggy, Nicola, and I are going to have a conversation, and Laura's going to interject if and when she wants to, but no pressure, Laura. So we're going to have a chat for about 20 minutes or so, and then there'll be opportunity for audience questions. And as is kind of said in the chat, if you've got questions, do pop them into the Q&A box along the bottom, and we'll get to them towards the end of the event, and just put them in as and when they occur to you. Please don't hold back, and also you don't have to worry about being shy, because this is not like we can't see your faces, so please do that. So Ziggy and Nicola, my first question for you, reflecting on your reading, is that you both explore kind of the dark side of cities. So Nicola with kind of Dead Flowers, this crime, this at the center of the book, and Ziggy, you kind of reflecting on the issues for citizens of a particular place. Tell me about the appeal of going to the dark side. Nicola, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Gosh, well, from my perspective, I'm not sure it's an appeal so much as a kind of an impulse. So I know every time I sit down and I think about writing something, certainly years ago, I think I've given up on this now, but I used to sit down and I used to think, I'll write something nice, I'll write something fun and nice and light. And then the next thing I know, there was like a body count of 16, and it was just, it is just, I guess it's partly what I read, because I read a lot of dark fiction and I read a lot of crime fiction, but it is just where my imagination seems to go. Like, I've always been like that. I remember when I was younger, I used to hate things like Punch and Judy shows and the circus. I used to always find them kind of dark and creepy. Even Bagpuss, if you remember Bagpuss on TV, the kids' I used to think that was really creepy. I just used to watch that and think, but Emily's probably dead by now. And this is, I could find the darkness in anything. And that's just always been the way my mind works. So yeah, it's not so much kind of that it appeals to me necessarily, as I don't really have a choice. It's where my imagination goes.
Ziggy, what about you, about kind of exploring these themes in your work, the kind of darker and more difficult side of society, and representing that in your work?
I feel like I don't want to say I totally get what Nicola said, but I do. I started off like, I keep on wanting to create something nice, something fluffy, just something that's really lovely to read on, I don't know, rainy days and something. But this book actually started off like that. It sounded like fairy tale, like, it's talking about the following chapter is actually, you're going to be introduced to a magical cat. So it's like speaking cat who makes you food and stuff. And it sounded really, really nice. But along the way, it's the last half of that book actually sounded like what Nicola had been reading. So yeah, like Nicola said, I wanted to write something nice, but then suddenly body counts just keep on increasing. I wouldn't say that it's not deliberate. I think somehow I kind of always think of it like that. And especially if we're talking about Jakarta, the fun thing is the first time that I actually settled in Jakarta, it's like about 2015 or so. My sister just got a house there, so I decided to just live there for a bit. And then the first day that I arrived, I slept through the night, and in the morning, on the house next to mine, there's an arson, breaking and entering, and a murder. So I thought, whoa. So if we're talking about Jakarta, I always think of the worst of that city because my introduction has always been like that. And this book also talks about crossing the sea, which is something that I also did as I went from my hometown to Jakarta. And also Jakarta is always something that I associate with flood because I don't know what's going on in Jakarta. Like 2 meters flood is not okay. But a lot of things that I watch on the news, because Jakarta is a capital city, is always bad. So I think it's not like I deliberately want to write something bad. It's just that it's the thing that had been fed to me all my life, which is not a good thing to say, but I create good books out of it, so I'm okay.
Yeah, I think it's these there's always a rich kind of theme of the kind of less positive side of things. I feel like it's a kind of good source of inspiration for writers, and just kind of reflecting on that as writers, as novelists. What do you think the role of the writer is in tackling these kind of societal issues head on? Like, Nicola, I'm thinking in Dead Flowers, there's kind of a discussion about domestic violence, and Ziggy, you're kind of, in the reading, you're kind of talking about kind of poverty and access to money, and should writers be tackling this more? Why is it important to you to be kind of writing about that in your work?
I think for me, it's not necessarily that I go out with that intention. Again, it's the things that end up being concerns of mine. Some of it's catharsis, working through things that I've been through and things that have happened to me. But a lot of it is just it's because I guess I write realism, and because I write books that are set in cities, these things are, they are what happens to people. And I think I've written about these kind of issues quite a lot, but never ever set out to think, I need to sort of tackle this societal issue. It's never ever been on my mind like that. I mean, I am doing my PhD at the moment, and then that makes you think about those themes a little bit more and thread them all together. So I can see that I do that in my fiction, but I think that is the thing that fiction can do really well, compared to, say, more academic research, in that you explore those things, but quite unconsciously. And I think that can be quite a powerful way of kind of working through stuff that's happening around you.
Ziggy, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I also reflect on that because the things that we are writing, sometimes it's not really intentional. It's just something that we are processing because it's something that we see every day, and somehow probably it even affects our lives or people around us. And our worries are sometimes not addressed in any other way. So we eventually address it ourselves. And perhaps eventually it became something that you present to the public. For me, at least I think that, because I have a bit of an intention, probably because stuff like this aren't talked about enough, or people talk about it, but they don't really have like a real conscience about it. In this story, I actually write a lot about overpopulation, which is something that we are dealing in Indonesia, especially in Jakarta. Like everywhere is like, and housing issues are also around this, and you don't know how you can solve that, and it's threatening you. And I think a lot of things that I write is because it's a scary real life, and I don't know where I can talk. I can talk about it. Like everybody knows that it's a problem, but they don't address it. So I don't know, like I think I have a bit of a hope that probably by writing about it, probably people would, I don't know, at least as a person, they do something better. So yeah, I think that's how it became a real story that sounds, you know, that derived from a bad place, and it became something that you present to the public.
So much. I think what's interesting is that often when we talk about Nottingham, what you just said is that we're a sort of city of rebellion and kind of activism and kind of social justice, and you know, we're known for writers like D.H. Lawrence and Alan Sillitoe, to name just two, who really kind of shone a light on kind of what was happening and issues at the time, and historically kind of lots of kind of points of rebellion have started in Nottingham. Having just named two men, there are obviously kind of lots of women writers, and Ziggy, I know that you've been involved in a project around kind of shining a light on forgotten Indonesian women writers, and Nicola, I'll come to you to speak about kind of women writers in Nottingham. But Ziggy, could you tell everyone a bit about your project and getting people to remember these women writers and share?
Oh god, that was one of the best thing I've ever done. It was a collective of only 10 women. We are like built, like I think most of us are like young women. We are collected to talk about, to research and to find out about their lives and their works of the dead women writers in Indonesia, because we exist in history, but we are never written in any books. Like, and if we are written in a, and you know, as a comparison of the don'ts. So because female writers in Indonesian history had always been spoken to as something as writers who write melancholic stuff, domestic stuff, as if it's autobiographical stories. And we are trying to put more perspective about is it the truth? Are these actually bad things? Are there actually bad writers? Like, why don't they have the same credits as male writers? Because I think the most interesting is that one of the writers have actually won the novel writing competition that I won, but all the male peers that won that same competition in that same year have been written in the books, but she has never been written. Her work has been translated into Dutch, into English, but people don't talk about her. And my friend was like was researching that. Her name is Suwarsi Hijoyo-Puspito. She's I think she's from Bandung. I kind of forgot, but it is brilliant, and her writing is actually really brilliant. She reflects on how a domestic life is affected by the war. So we actually know a lot about what's going on during the wartime in Indonesia and how it affects people on daily basis from her writing. But her writing is reduced to being called as women just feeling miserable all the time. It's like, it's an actual words that was written in a letter that was published. So I really love that we have like a lot of angry female energy in that forum, and it resulted in something really incredible. We actually did find a lot of people, and these writers still have their grandkids and or probably their family sometimes. Their sons, and a lot of them still have a lot of trauma, but we managed to create something that is at least a little safe for them to talk about the memory of their mothers or sisters or grandmothers, and it was brilliant. And but you know, unfortunately we cannot go on with that. I hope that we could have like the next generation of 10 other writers who do that as well, but we still haven't been able to continue that project. But I think it's a really brilliant project. We go around several cities talking about the people that we found, and yeah, I mean, I hope that there's a lot more initiatives like that.
Thank you so much. I mean, I personally think Laura and I could have a conversation, because I think Nottingham has a really strong history of women being involved in our lace industry and those kind of more domestic stories might have been, what should we say, slightly overshadowed by some of our kind of more male well-known writers. Nicola, is there anything you kind of want to respond as a woman writer from Nottingham?
Yeah, I mean, I always feel very torn about this because Lawrence is from the same area as my one set of grandparents, and I was born on the street where the old rally factory used to be. So I've got really strong connections in terms of my working class roots with Silito and Lawrence, and I think that they did do something different in terms of shining a light on working class communities, which really spoke to me, particularly when I was a young writer. But I do think women's voices have tended to be kind of drowned out. And, often, I mean, I was involved in a similar project to the one that Ziggy just described. It was called Dawn of the Unread, which was...
That was a really cool name.
It was a graphic novel project, and we all wrote different writers from Nottingham were given different... dead writers from Nottingham to write about. And I think the example that I was given to look into, to research and write a little comic strip about, was very typical of probably what happened with a lot of talented women and women writers. And it was a writer called Alma Revell, and she was actually married to Alfred Hitchcock. And she was very involved in writing and editing, and even doing the actual film editing of his movies. But most people won't even have heard of her name. And I think that's what's happened in terms of over the years. And I would like to do more work on that, really, digging up historical women writers, historical women working class writers particularly, would be really exciting. But it's tricky because, as you say, I mean, even contemporaneously, a lot of women, they can write and have success and win prizes and all of those things, but they still won't be talked about in such a big national kind of way. They won't necessarily be written about by critics, by people doing literary studies. And I think there is still an issue with women just not being noticed and not being recognised. So historically, obviously, that's even worse, which makes it tricky.
So if anyone wonders what I was doing looking around, is I've got a copy of Dawn of the Unread on my shelf, and I was about to kind of show it. But Simon has very handily shared a link in the chat, so thank you very much for that. And I think what you've both said is so interesting and so vital and important, and I hope that that we as a city of literature can connect to our sister cities of literature to do a project which is about these forgotten women's voices, and how do we talk about them going as well. And also, I think there's something as well about industry and how industry can connect, and how women were so involved in that. We have lathes in Nottingham, and I know that kind of cotton is a big thing that was in Indonesia as well. So how can we talk about that, and how do we amplify those voices? I should say, and I'm sure you both have recommendations that I'll come to you from, but for those of you who might be interested in reading some more fantastic Indonesian writers, I really recommend Intan Paramaditya, I hope I've said that right, and Karani Baroka, who are both like really fantastic women, and I think Oka is non-binary, but like really fantastic writers who are talking about things through either a feminist or an eco kind of critical lens. So there's some kind of Indonesian recommendations for me. Ziggy, do you want to add any more writers, women writers, that people should be looking out for?
Women writers. I actually want to, of course, I want to highlight my friend Isyana Artarini. She was one of the she is actually the person who researches the writer that I was mentioning about, and she actually wrote a personal essay in English called "I Am My Own Home," and I really love the way that I really love her research. She's very passionate, and when the way she writes things is very elaborate, but also it's emotional. But I don't know, like she puts all the information needed, but in a way that makes you feel warm. So I think that's something about Isyana that I always really love. She always sounds like she's giving really good advice, even though she's just spouting nonsense, but she's just an amazing person in real life and in writing. of course, I would also like to highlight my friend Norman Eriksson Pasaribu. She's they actually they wrote a lot about queer life in Indonesia, especially in Jakarta. He's actually in Bekasi, not Jakarta, but we'll call it Jakarta. And there I really love their short story collection, Happy Stories mostly. That's how it was translated, and it was translated by Tiffany Sao, and who's a Indonesian Indonesian / Australian. So she's also doing a really amazing job on that. I was given both of I haven't gotten the US version of it, but the translation was really amazing in both UK version and the Australian version. And I really love how Norman captures the movements in the city in a way that is not as noisy as I do, because Norman's movement is quiet and contemplative. So I think it's a very different way to capture Jakarta and its surrounding. So I think I would like to talk about those two first, because they have, the books that you can find. Probably also Ernie Alajai, and we have a lot of collectives that translates Indonesian short stories into English. I think I forgot the name of the website, but they collect lots of interesting things, including Ernie's writing. So yeah.
Thanks, Ziggy. For those of you who are interested in Norman's work, which I also highly recommend, it's published by Tilted Axis Press in the UK, who are a really fantastic independent publisher. Nicola, I want to give this an opportunity. Are there any, for those audience members who might not be super familiar with Nottingham's literary scene, are there any writers that you would like to highlight for them, aside from the ones who've been in this fantastic event series, but who would you say our kind of audience should be checking out from Nottingham?
Oh no, I don't know. I haven't actually watched every single one of this series, so I don't know exactly who you covered.
Put you on the spot there, sorry.
But I guess there are a few people I would recommend. I think obviously there's Alison Moore, who she, a little bit like me, she really has a kind of a dark imagination, and she goes places with her fiction that are really interesting and just writes really beautifully as well. And again, kind of captures the world in a very different way from me. I think she's got kind of a very clear, wonderful, lyrical prose style, but very spare at the same time. It's quite hard to describe, actually. And then sort of a bit more of an underrated writer, I'd say, Megan Taylor, who again writes dark fiction, ghost stories, writes with an awful lot of passion, and has been published really by smaller publishers and not had, as has Ali, but not had quite the kind of boost of a big prize that Ali's had, but does write really fantastic fiction. And I think I'd recommend people giving her a look. And then Kim Slater, who writes more kind of fast-moving, pacey, sort of psychological thrillers, but also young adult fiction, just really fantastic, gripping stories. So they're the three for me today.
Thank you so much. So before we open to audience questions, you all seem to be very shy. You haven't asked any questions. So if there aren't any questions in there, I'll just carry on until the end. But I do hope there'll be some from the audience. Is my sort of last question for now is what does kind of being a writer connected to a city of literature mean to you? So Nicola, I'm going to come to you first. What does the city of literature mean to you?
Well, I think it's nice to have the place that you live recognised as having sort of a vibrant literary scene. And I think Nottingham really does. And I think we were talking about this for a long time before it became a city of literature, just how creative the city was and how many writers they were, and how there was just a real kind of groundswell of energy and productivity and literature and film and TV and all sorts coming out of the city. And so to have that recognized is really lovely, and really kind of, it does make you feel kind of like you're part of something bigger. And I think being a writer can be a really lonely experience. So having the sense that there's a community around you, and not just locally, but then that can become international, like this kind of event. I think there's something very special about that.
Thank you. Ziggy, what does kind of Jakarta being a city of literature mean to you, and being a writer who has connections to that place?
Oh, I think we are very young, so we have only been a year, and I think this is my first time being included in the in Jakarta City of Literature event, and I think at this point I am more concerned than excited, because when it comes to having a platform like this, especially the one that connects you to a bigger audience, you always wonder about who's going to get the highlight, who's the spotlight, and everything, who's going to get and the opportunity to tell what story. And I think probably as a female writer, and a writer whose friends are in minority. I'm looking for another word for that, but yeah, you wonder, you keep on trying to find a place where you can feel safe, and and you can share your stories. But in our platform so far, we're still facing that same issue again and again. So I'm still, I have a lot of concerns. I do have hopes with this City of Literature, because I think well, I don't know what to say about that, but I wish that it could be something that is that is different and new, with the approach in regards to who's going to be able to voice their concerns and their experiences, because there are lots of voices that actually needs to step away and give opportunities to other people. I think that's true in a lot of platforms, not only in the City of Literature. So I hope that this is going to be different.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts, Ziggy. And I think all cities of literature, as part of our mission, is to be as inclusive as possible, and kind of represent the kind of wider community of writers in those places. There's a question here, which Laura, you might be best placed to answer, but Ziggy, please do chip in, which is, it says, with so many languages in Indonesia, how does the publishing industry manage? Are there lots of different language publishing houses? Do they kind of translate into each other's languages? So I don't know, Laura, if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, there's 17,000 islands with more than 600 something languages, but there's only one national language. So majority of all publications are in Indonesian. But then we are seeing a trend for certain genre, such as children's books written bilingual. More and more children's books, especially when they are coming from the big cities, are written at least in 2 languages. So
I think what's also interesting is in West Java, we actually have lots of the industry of publishing in Sundanese is actually something that we should also talk about, because that's really brilliant. They have their own literary awards for books written in Sundanese, and I don't think we have that in any other languages, but it's something that I think, is it in Javanese?
In Javanese, yep, and in Padang, Minang. So the provinces, some provinces are encouraging that, but how to distribute the books across Indonesia on national scale, that's another issue.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, but
oh, sorry, Laura, do you want to say some more?
So being a city of literature, I guess, for Jakarta is not just mainly for the Jakartans. It gives us an opportunity to I guess, include all other authors across Indonesia for this super wide international network. And we are seeing that, when we spread the news about residencies and all other programs that other city of literatures are doing, majority actually of Indonesian writers are coming out of Jakarta that are applying and participating at those programs. So I guess Jakarta as a city of literature should be enjoyed and should be very inclusive to all Indonesian authors. Yeah.
We've got a question from Nafilia. Apologies if I've said that wrong, but this is a question for you, Nicola, which says, are there any genres you'd love to write in the future outside the ones that you've already kind of written in? Thank you. And then it says that they don't have a question for Ziggy, but they just wanted to say that they really enjoyed your reading. So that's fantastic. Nicola, want to respond?
Gosh, there's a question. I mean, I do write in different genres. I do really like different genres. So my first book was kind of literary fiction, but it was kind of had a crime aspect. I've written a couple of books that have been kind of labeled as psychological horror, but they're a bit on the edge of different genres as well. I guess I'd really, I mean, I have written a ghost story, but I'd really like to write the ghost story I wrote was quite a commercial one. I'd really like to write much more of a literary ghost story, much more where it's kind of literary fiction, but there's ghostly elements, I guess. But I don't know. I mean, I do like to try different genres. I do have some ideas for kind of speculative science fiction, that kind of thing as well. So who knows? But I love different genres. And so I think my work tends to straddle, like, so for example, Dead Flowers, although it's a crime book, there's lots of very gothic elements. There's lots of very kind of spooky, creepy bits as well. So that's how I tend to write. I tend to bring in bits of different kinds of genres into what I'm doing as part of my process. So yeah, all of them is the short answer.
How to choose.
Yes, exactly.
So I'm going to ask one sort of last quick question and then we're going to wrap up. So what's next for both of you? What are you working on now? Nicola said you're doing a PhD. Is that taking up your time? Ziggy, what's next on your horizons? Ziggy, do you want to go first?
Sure. I'm a full-time writer. I am privileged to be one of them. And I think what's next for me is, of course, I'm actually working on a manuscript that I wrote during the residency in Essex. I was with Metal Residency. They were brilliant. I really love the place as well. And it's something that I've been working on since 2019, but I'm kind of refining it and I'm really excited about it because it's also talking about the sea, because you can really see the sea from I was in Southend. So it's like all the escape from a sea that's pretty similar to the one that I have in my hometown. So I feel like I'm also bridging that experience in the residency with my experience living and being raised in my hometown, and something that I'm really excited about. So yeah, that's my next project.
Thank you. And I'm just going to add a kind of side note that for those of you who don't know the fantastic work of Metal, they do lots of great work in Southend and Liverpool and Peterborough, and do fantastic writer residencies. And in fact, Norman did a residency.
Yeah.
Who you were speaking about did a residency with them recently. Nicola, what's next for you?
Well, I'm currently finishing the follow-up book to Dead Flowers. So there is actually a sequel in the offing called Wish You Were Here, which is actually set, funny we should mention seaside, but it's actually set at least partly on the south coast of England in Brighton and Worthing and places like that. I have just started my PhD. I'm writing a novel there about universities, funnily enough, about teaching at universities. But I think it's only really started that, but I think it's going to be about a psychologist and it's going to be a psychological thriller. So they're the two projects that are kind of coming up for me. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. I feel like I could be chatting to Ziggy and Nicola and Laura for much longer, but we don't have much more time for that. So all this mention of seas, I'd like to thank you for joining us on this voyage to Jakarta, over the sea, to our fantastic colleagues at Jakarta City of Literature, and thank you, Nicola, for joining us from Nottingham on this journey. All I would like to say is you can buy Nicola's books in Five Leaves. You can seek out Ziggy's work online. It's also in the Book of Jakarta, which is published by Comma Press, and that's, I'm sure, is available in Five Leaves. And some of the writers that we've mentioned, Intan and Norman, their work you can order from Five Leaves as well, which I highly recommend. I should say that I'm not on commission from Jakarta City of Literature to champion their writers. I've just done a lot of projects with Indonesian writers in the past, and they are completely fantastic. So please do go and read some writers from Indonesia, as well as all of the fantastic writers that we have here in Nottingham at our City of Literature. I think that's all from me, but I want to thank Nicola and Ziggy and Laura, and also Simon for facilitating this fantastic discussion. It's been a real treat to speak to you. And as I said earlier, there's one more event in the series from our colleagues in Lviv City of Literature. So we hope that we'll see you then later this week. Thank you very much.
Also, a big thank you to Hannah from Nottingham. So without you, this session wouldn't be that fun.
Thank you very much. And everyone have a wonderful afternoon. Or
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.